the 1 minute,
We're
so
going to talk about it. We always put it.
Thank you.
I'll say 30 seconds just so people take their seats.
I don't think anybody flinched.
That was my phone gone.
Good morning and welcome to the school board workshop dated January 23rd, 2018. Our first item today is policy 3.90 review of charter schools with Dr. Laura Kingsley and Dr. Natalie Roca. And Mr. Art Hardy.
I'm swapping out Dr. Kingsley and Dr. Hardy.
Okay, and I'll say, I know we have a very tight agenda, obviously these are all estimated timelines, but I also want to let the board members know, since we didn't have specific add-ons for board members, if there's an opportunity with timing, certainly bring anything up, but also after the board meeting today in comments, because I want to make sure you had an opportunity to address any issues. So take it away.
All right, so you have in front of you a revised policy regarding charter schools. Natalie, you want to do a short introduction to it and then make sure you leave lots of time for questions and discussion.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. School board members, Superintendent Dr. Bowden, Art Hardy right next to me, yay. As you know, we've been reviewing policies, all the different policies that we have in the county, and of course this is the one for charter schools. And I also sent you a memo trying to summarize the different changes. As you can see, it's a 37-page document. It's quite extensive. So, and of course, I met with my colleague, Mr. Hardy, throughout this process, and also had Mitzi review the section on funding and finance, everybody weighing in on it. I also did some reorganizing because it was kind of choppy before, so some of it just maybe, in my opinion, flowing better. So I don't know if you have it in front of you. Yes, you do. So the first section really is the part about who can apply for a charter, and the areas that we struck out were just to clean it up a little bit. As you know, the legislation, the statute is quite extensive in covering it, so I know I was torn between how much do you want to put into a policy and how much not, but it is a public document, and people do refer to this first, so I figured we can always refer them back to the statute if they want more detail. So the next big section on page 2 is that whole application and approval process. And you'll see the changes are that effective with the school year, applicants can submit their charter application on February 1st. Before, it was always the August 1st cycle. So this year, I have the opportunity to do it twice. Yay. So, but after this year, it'll always be February 1st. Another big change is that the applicant, if approved, we don't have to approve, they will open the charter 18 months after the approval. As it is now, they approve and boom, the next school year. So there is more time. Of course, we can agree to do it, quicker. I think it allows them more time to get their building, to get organized. So that's, I think, a plus in that regard. And the rest of it was also a shorter timeline for approving the charter contract after it's approved by the board. And the rest of it just cleaning up some language. The other big areas where you see stricken, the application itself is quite extensive, and it varies from year to year. And now it's 22 sections plus worksheets.
Which section is that, just so we, because I know.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So now I'm on page, let me see. It starts at the bottom of page 3.
Okay.
Application requirements and district review process. So all of that stricken language is language that was there that pretty much paralleled the application. And back in the good old days, there were just only these sections. Now it's 23. So what I was proposing is to strike that and just make reference to the application itself. And now we have a different version for a virtual application versus a standard, so it would become so many pages. So that was what we were proposing there. So that's all the stricken language there. It'll clean this up. Then on page 9 and 10, we were proposing to include information about the Charter Review Committee process, because that is something that's not statutorily required, but it's a certain aspect of Sarasota's process that I think is good to delineate in the policy. Other counties have it as well, but I think it's good to put it in there. That's my opinion. We can strike it out. So again, that in this, it's a may. We may establish, because we may get to a point where we don't have a committee. So that's all that language there. I mean, do you want to go more slowly, section through section? No. Okay. I don't think so. And, most of this, other than where I'll point out, it's all required, so it's not like we have much leeway. Is there anything you want to weigh in on? Feel free to interrupt me.
No, just the general overview. First, Natalie did a lot of work on this, and this is her baby. Others of us helped, but she did a lot of work on it.
If you like it, I did a lot of work. If there's some areas that are not clear, then
I did that part.
It's Art's fault.
Then I did that part. I think the overview is just what Natalie said, and that is almost all of this is required in one form or another by the statute. The real difference here for Sarasota is the specific language about the CRC. That's something that does not have to be in pursuant to the statute, but has been the process here for a number of years, and it seems like people are happy with it, but obviously it's your opportunity to weigh in on it. But most of this is pretty much required by the statute, and we could, as Natalie said, have probably a very short policy that just referred to the statute. But I think people do tend to, rather than try to read through the statute, come to our policy first, at least. So this is really an effort to try to be helpful
Agreed.
to the public.
Surely.
While we're on page 9, and I don't know which one of you did this one, but it's D, I guess it's E1 now. There should be a period between the first and second sentence there. After designee, and then it says the district. It says the district CRC
Thank
is
you.
determined manually.
thank you.
And because there is so much, I mean, really, this is quite extensive, and I appreciate the work you've done, and I think once the agreed, if in fact the stricken language is agreed upon, I'm sure there are any grammatical changes you'll.
And there might be some formatting
Right.
issues with the ABCD, and we'll correct those. And I did find a couple of errors that I already identified there,
Right,
but
but the
they're
content
minor.
is-
The content will be the same.
Eric, go ahead.
Mine are content-based, and you and I discussed these.
Yes.
And so my first question was, it says that a charter application has to be nonprofit,
Page
1. And you and I talked that it could be any legal entity organized under state statute. Specifically, I'm asking if, say, a community college, which isn't a nonprofit but is a government entity, they wanted to apply for a collegiate school, statute allows for that to happen. We're not going to disbar them because it's not a nonprofit, are we?
I'll defer to Mr.
Well,
Hart.
the
Statute.
college system, which are the community colleges, certainly have the right to apply.
Okay, right. So
So do we need to
nonprofit doesn't
amend-
need to be. Going back to August, I'm trying to.
Well, no, we're fine.
Okay.
Do we need to, I mean, I want to make sure that we have clarification there, so that, do we need to add any
It could be a
additional language?
for-profit charter school, not that I like that, but I mean, there's no requirement.
No, the charter school is a public school. They may engage with a management company that's for profit. And the Florida college system, they're all public universities and colleges.
So the point of, we put in our policy, they have to be nonprofit.
And that's the law, basically. The
Well,
school itself,
They could be nonprofit or run by a member of the Florida, I think the verbiage is Florida College System.
Systems, right.
Which is not a for-profit. Those are all public community colleges or
I
whatever.
have a couple of.
Yep.
You mentioned February,
yes, sir.
but yet when I read statute, it references that you apply in February to get 18 months, but they didn't strike out the August 1st date, which I read it to mean that you could do August to be 12 months or February for 18 months.
Agreed that it is not clear in the statute. The statute
Yeah.
says, and it has historically said, a sponsor shall receive and consider charter applications received on or before August 1 of each calendar year for charters to be opened at the beginning of the next year. That's the old language. Then that remains in the statute.
Right.
And it then says, Beginning in 2018 and thereafter, a sponsor shall receive and consider charter school applications received on or before February 1 of each calendar year for charter schools to be opened 18 months later.
So I took that to mean you could be August 1st, 12 months, August 1st, 18 months.
And that's a
February 1st.
conversation that Natalie and I had, because I think it's something you could interpret either way reasonably. And we sought more information from, I sought information from what are other districts doing. That doesn't necessarily mean it's right, and then Natalie sought information from DOE, the Office of Charter Schools, and the consistent feedback we got, most importantly from DOE, was no, as of 2018, we're looking at the February deadline.
And then
Hold on, Eric, hold on.
Yes, ma'am.
A couple things. One just process-wise, because we're going to have a lot of policy reviews going forward, I want to make sure we execute on take the opportunity. So I want to go back, and then we'll go to yours. Go back to ensure that on item eligibility to apply on page 1, you brought the point up about university system, so that's 1A, so are we understanding that we would add the school shall organize as a nonprofit organization prior to receiving approval, or do we need to change that to be inclusive of also the university system?
I see the superintendent.
It's my understanding that the university serves, or the community college serves as the sponsor, but the school is still organized as a nonprofit entity. Is that not correct?
That's what I thought, but I don't.
I believe that's correct.
So they may sponsor, but at the end of the day, we're going to enter into an agreement with a nonprofit entity that is organized. It may consist of the board at the community college, but at the end of the day, the contract is not entered into with SCF, but it's SCF Collegiate School.
So it's a separate entity.
That is my recollection of our one situation that we have
Can we
with SCF.
confirm that, though, before?
Yeah, and I think 100.
Excuse me, I have a question on that, too, before.
Okay, so I just, again, 1A, want to make sure. So
Okay.
we need clarification to confirm that the language is
You're all public schools.
accurate.
I would just tell them the statute site.
Oh,
that says
sorry, okay.
1002.33(3)A is where you'd find the statute site about what entities are allowed to enter into contracts.
Okay.
Right.
Well, my understanding is that all institutions that are part of the Florida college system are public institutions. But you're right, even if you're not, when you create the school is what has to be non-public, not the sponsor, not who's on the governing board.
Nonprofit.
But we can definitely throw that in there just to be transparent to the public.
Yeah, I mean, clearly members of the Florida college system can sponsor a school,
So
can apply for a school.
perhaps play with the language as an option before we move it forward for adoption, but is there any hesitation? I mean, I don't think there's any dispute on that. I just want to make sure we're accurate. Was this your question in regards to this one?
I think that trying to clarify, what's been said, there can be 3 entities in there. The school itself shall be nonprofit. There can be a sponsoring entity that can be a college, a for-profit or a not-for-profit entity, and there also can be a management company that can be a not-for-profit or a for-profit or whatever. But I think this talks to the school itself must be a not-for-profit, and I don't know if that you understand the difference between the 3.
I just want to be in compliance with that state statute. I hear what you're saying. I just think.
So I think we just need to confirm that it's the rank, but no, that the language is not too narrow and that it wouldn't exclude, and because it doesn't sound like anyone has the intention to do that, but to make sure that it doesn't bar any post-secondary.
And we couldn't even if we wanted to.
Correct. So and the whole purpose is to make sure this is compliant, right? So,
Right.
Eric, you said you had another question.
So my next issue had to do with you talking about putting in things that are in the application in the policy, and you and I talked about this, about not wanting to regurgitate what's in the statute. And my issue with that is that the application kind of can change from year to year.
Correct.
With the DOE, while statute, while it can change, when it changes, we're going to change the policy anyways. And so in statute, they delineate the things that need to be in somebody's application. And so I was just trying to understand that the thought process of not putting the items that are outlined in statute, but instead putting the items that are outlined in application. While they don't contradict what you've put in, there are additional items that are listed in the state statute that are not listed in our policy. And the reason why I think that it's important is if we get an application and you're trying to evaluate that application, I'm going to go to our policy first to see, do they meet our policy? And so if I can find an area where they're not meeting our policy, it gives me ability to, approve or disapprove based upon that laundry. I agree, it's hardly a long document. So the question is, do you...
What I hear you saying, though, is referring more to the components of the application versus the sections in the actual template. Because you're right, the sections in the template keep changing. So we could insert the requirements of someone who's applying. That's only, I think, seven sections versus a 27-page component. So
Wait. Hold on one
Yes,
second.
ma'am.
Okay.
I'm just trying to be conscious of people's
I
time.
said no, but I said at the beginning, I know we said 15 minutes, but I want to do this,
ma'am.
productively. So two others. So I want to go back. So you've raised a couple ones, and I also want to give if anyone else has any.
I want to be sure
Excuse me.
I know what section he's talking about.
Okay, so everyone stop. We got the first section, the question you addressed. There was another one so this is now page 2, item 2A, the February 1st. For clarification, it sounds like DOE codified the rules based on statute and meaning, and that's where your clarification was February 1st.
The input we got from DOE, and correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, was that they were interpreting the statute as of 2018 to have a February 1 single deadline, not two deadlines.
I'm not
per year. Yeah, but I agree with you, because when I read it, my initial reaction was, now there are two deadlines. But on further review, that is at least not the position DOE is taking.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay. Sure.
And what happens oftentimes is when they change the statute and they realize that they missed this and there, they have something that they call a glitch bill, that they'll come back and fix that, and maybe they will. And if they fix it and it's not correct, then they've got those son of glitch bills, and then they go on to the grandson and all of that. So,
Okay, hold on. So February 1st stays.
Yes.
Okay.
So my next question,
Page.
Page 28, Human Resources, the very first section.
So the rest of it's good with you,
Yeah,
Eric?
I'm not gonna.
Wow.
You and I talked about it.
Well, if I may stop, before we jump
Yes,
to
ma'am.
that, are there any other issues or topics, concerns on any items going before page 28?
So the question is we had a charter application come before us, and I want to say they basically were going to have the sponsoring entity pick the principal and not have the governing board pick the principal, which I think our board would rather the governing board pick the principal, if I'm using the nomenclature correctly. But in here, and I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but I just don't want people to be able to twist things.
Mm-hmm.
It says the charter school shall select its own employees.
On page 28.
And a charter
Page
school is shouldn't we say the governing board of the charter school? Not to be too nitpicky, but because
I think it's
confusion at the last people figured out a way to circumvent the system to make it so that the management company really was the one controlling it. And I don't like that.
Well, you're still going to have issues in which the management company is going to, quote, select personnel. You will still have an action that goes before the charter school or before the charter school board to ratify that selection. Ultimately, if they become an employee of the charter school, there are various employees who remain employees of the management entity, and that is covered through their contract with. But if they are essentially doing headhunting and saying, we're going to go find a principal for you, that item still comes before their board. But I understand the clarity, just simply the word, a charter school board shall maintain. Right.
I would point out, for what it's worth, that the statute 1002.33 sub 12, which is employees of charter schools, a charter school shall select its own employees. So that came right out of the statute.
Okay.
Now, I agree that might be subject of some interpretation exactly what that means.
What a charter school.
What a charter school.
And stop. There was, before you go on, because there was another issue you raised before that I want to make sure we clarified, which was when it related to, I believe it was what to be included on as required on the application or and so I know we don't want to make it an extraordinarily long document, but I think you raise a good point where if we only pick some of it, doesn't mean we're excluding what's in statute, but I think if we're either going to reference statute or if we're going to list it out, because I think you made a good point, people do go and look at this, that we be uniform. So we either go one way or the other, and that would be my preference.
My preference was to list the requirements so that when I get an application, I can go to policy and say, did they meet this criteria? Did they meet that criteria? Did they meet that criteria?
So a compromise would be to use some of the criteria that's listed for what the application needs to address, which is only a small subset of what is in the actual application. But these are the big ticket items, the guiding principles, the measurable objectives, the curriculum. So these are the most essential pieces of the application.
Finance.
Can you,
Oh, excuse me,
can you tell me the
finance.
page number that we're on? Because I want to make sure everyone's able to follow along.
Okay, so I'll let you recite that.
Statute. Yeah, well, Natalie's looking for that. The statute says charter school applications are subject to the following requirements. It talks about you have to submit an application that, 1, demonstrates how the school will use guiding principles and meet statutorily defined purpose. 2, provide a detailed curriculum plan, and I'm shortening this a little bit. 3, contains goals and objectives for improving student learning and measuring that improvement. 4, describes reading curriculum and differentiated strategies that will be used. 5, contains an annual financial plan for each year, up to 5 years. 6, discloses names of the applicant and others. 7, contains additional information the sponsor may require.
Page 3.
So that's and I don't see a problem with listing that, kind of briefly in the policy.
So then
I agree.
It starts at the bottom of page 3, the application requirements, and continues at the top of page 4. So on item C, for example, we could put this language in here from the state statute that Art just read. So make reference to, of course, the application, the criteria, and also these requirements. With
Financial
that,
plan.
the ones that Art just read. And then still strike out the language here that matches the application template.
I just want to make sure we have consensus of the board.
Well, yeah. I mean, before you do the more work, we'll ultimately vote on it at a later time.
7 bullets.
So moving it to list those is what we'd like to see.
As long as we say that it definitely clarifies that it's that plus any other requirements by statute or DOE, so that they, well, I should.
Based on compliance with Florida Statute 1002, yeah.
Just so that we make sure that we add that language and anything that required in statute, so that we know that if the statute changes before we change our policy, that we encompass any of those changes.
Okay.
Good point.
To piggyback on what Shirley says is item number 7. Does Shirley want to add? So item number 7 is
Page.
It's the statute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So item number 7 in the statute says any of the information the school board wants to make them provide.
Any, yeah.
So
in addition
is there
to.
something else that you want them to provide? Okay. Okay, no?
Well, but that's a good point. We have to list out what we would need
Right, of course.
beforehand. We can't say after the fact, we wanted this and.
Right, of course, they're having to fill out the template, and we've been talking about the template, so I know you all understand, that's a state template,
Correct.
which is fairly extensive.
Right.
Changes, but there's going to be a lot more in the application than 1 through 6. But if there are specific things the board wants, you're right, now's the time to put
I
them
know,
in.
but I know my other board members want.
At one time, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
At one time, we talked about having them make sure that when they give us an application, that application doesn't include local referendum dollars that we may or may not give to the school, or may or may not have even available for the school if it doesn't pass. I don't know if we wanted to put some language in there about that. Just throw that out there.
Well, I think
just
it's a
make sure
good
that it's
point.
where they're their financial plan is based on.
Well, I think that's a good point, whether or not they do both include with and without. I think that we've run into that issue, but I also.
Our instructions to the applicants say not to include them, because remember, we have a lot of information about the submittal, everything from pagination to what to include or not include. And I think this number 7 about any information the sponsor may require, as you recall, when we go through the application process, we may ask them, hey, turn this in, we'd like to see a sample curriculum. And I think that would catch all of that we ask for to clarify through the process.
So might I suggest that you keep this one clean and conform basically to the statute? You may consider a separate policy for how does one make application for referendum funding? Because we've talked about it as a separate application.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Yeah. I think you raise a good point, as they need to be prepared in the event, God forbid, we don't have a continuation of it. And we also, so we want to see what their financial stability is without that. And then in a secondary process, I like that idea. Good.
Adding it here to the section as part of the application process?
No.
Separate.
We'll propose a separate independent policy pertaining to how does one apply for and receive referendum funds. And so this, we want them to put forth a viable proposal that does not include referendum funds. And then separate of that, they may fill out a separate independent application covered on a separate policy 3.91.
I'll relay the message. I'll pass the message along to Mitzi.
Yeah. Caroline.
Does it have to be a policy, or can it be a procedure?
Well, I think it's the board giving direction to staff. I don't think it has to be a 20-page policy. It'll probably just be a one-pager that says there will be a separate application for referendum and talk about what that application should entail. So I'm thinking a 1 or 2-page policy, but I do believe it rises to the level that we need direction from the board.
Okay.
And you're saying after the application is approved by the board is when they would apply for it?
Well, I think we could have a separate workshop on does that application run concurrent to or subsequent to your initial charter application? Because you may have entities like we have dealt with now that submit the application years later or at the same time.
Yeah, and I would make that a separate workshop discussion so we can get through this one. You're good, Eric?
Yeah, so the next two are kind of nitpicky, I admit. So page 33, new D, second line, it basically talks about when we're supposed to reimburse the charter schools. And just, this has to do with accounting, so as accounting, we like to see numbers. It says that the reimbursement will be done timely and efficient. I don't know what that means. I'm used to net 30, within 30 days, within a particular day time frame. What does timely and efficient mean as far as our accounting department? I think that they deserve some sort of direction from the board. When should they be paid by?
You're looking, we need to have, say, within 60 days or within a time frame.
Payment shall be issued no later than 10 working days after receipt of funding, or the district shall pay a penalty of 1% per interest per month. Does that not cover what we're talking about?
But before that, it says timely and efficient, the second sentence. Shouldn't it be 10 days?
Oh, I see.
Or 30 days?
Well,
they kind of contradict each other.
Well, and two things. I think that, to be fair, given the extensive nature of the revisions here, there's probably likely, because I did find when I read through it, there's some areas that are redundant even, and I think that once we get the core elements addressed, I think it would behoove us to review, clean that up, because he makes a good point, but it is addressed on the with the timeline. So instead of just stating a timely and efficient, you just scratch that and put the no later than 10 working days.
After given funding.
Do you disagree? Or?
No, personally, I would be more comfortable if we have the opportunity to talk to Mrs. Corcoran about this
I would agree.
before.
I agree.
Okay.
I only brought it up not because I wanted to change it today, but I understand as a county department,
Right.
And the last one that I have is on page 36F. This is in state statute. This is just me being really nitpicky, and I understand that. F says, and we've talked about this, it says certified public accountant or an auditor. I don't know what that means. I know in state statute it says.
You don't know what CPA is?
I know what CPA means. I don't know what auditor means, because in order to, I understand they have to audit every year, but the people who audit the financial statements every year is a CPA. So I don't know what CPA, it's in statute. That's the exact verbiage that's in statute. And I said, I don't like this because it's in statute. I don't know what CPA or auditor means.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Does that mean that somebody else who's not a CPA could audit their books? And
Absolutely. We have a number of auditors that come and visit us. They're
financial. We're talking about financial.
Well, they look at financial components out of the Auditor General's office. They are not CPAs. They are state employees, and they offer a variety of opinions on our compliance with fair financial standards, and they do that. And I think that's, so you're looking for the distinction. An auditor typically would be someone from the state.
Well,
They use that broad term. Sometimes it's policy, sometimes it's financial, but that's where the term auditor comes from.
but the guy who signs the audit report, even the Inspector General, is a CPA.
So this is just for clarification.
I don't know.
This is taken directly from statute?
Yeah, it is. I'm not saying change it. I'm just
Pointing it out?
my displeasure of it.
Duly noted.
Okay, so there's no change on that one.
Take it up with the state.
Yeah, surely.
Yes.
On page 34, item E talks about the millage levy, if applicable. And is that where we want to add anything or not anything, or? But again, you want to talk to
Reference separate
Mitzi.
policy. Just, I'd go as far as saying a separate application. And then
34.
page 34 at the top, E, the underlined language talks about the millage.
Millage levy, if applicable, the district may, as its discretion, provide additional funding to a charter school.
we would reference a separate application covered under.
As long as there
Or
is one.
pursuant to.
Right.
Once there is one, then we can amend that to reference it. Yes?
I mean, if we're going to.
You wanna go back
I don't know what your timeline is. If we're doing this one first, I don't want to reference a policy that doesn't exist.
Correct.
If we're doing them together, then sure.
Well, I don't want to go through this whole process and then have to
No.
do it all again.
Okay,
Right, but I don't know that you have to reference that other policy here if the other policy exists. We could, if it exists.
yeah, actually, I think, yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if that has to be referenced there. Go ahead, Caroline.
I didn't think that it was at our discretion anymore.
That's what I was concerned about in general as
time
we
do
have
you
this
have?
discussion. So here's my thought. Because I don't think that after this workshop, I believe that there's going to be another draft. I don't know if we'll necessarily have a workshop around it. We may need to, because that discussion's, like you said, that's a longer, I've asked that question as well, as it relates to the sharing of referendum dollars with charter schools.
Well, the very short answer to that is that there was a circuit court opinion from the East Coast.
Correct.
Which is not binding on us or anywhere else other than in that, for that district, that indicated a millage referendum similar to ours was part of the FEFP and had to be distributed. To my knowledge, that wasn't appealed, and there's no binding precedent on that. It shows that that's certainly an argument that could be raised, but it is an unanswered question as far as a response or an answer being binding on us at this point. So this was written, as we try to do, to give the board as much discretion as possible. If it turns out that we're required to legally, then the policy would be trumped by the law.
No, the law would, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you said that right. Sorry. Shirley, go ahead.
I agree. We may not even, I don't know about, because there's that case, and I think there's another one going through about local millage on the capital side that might shed some light on this too. So maybe we ought to just kind of leave it gray right now and move on until we hear more or a decision is made. I don't know.
But Caroline, go ahead.
I still have a question about at the discretion. We are doing it. I thought we were mandated to share all of our resources with the charters.
I think it is certainly the traditional FEFP dollars need to be shared.
Yes, above and beyond that.
But if we're talking specifically about the 1 mil voted referendum millage, we have historically taken the position that that was not required to be shared, but certainly could be. I think it has been shared in large part over the years, but I don't believe
I'm not
that
finished.
historically there has been a legal mandate to do it. Now, this case from the East Coast that I referenced could, the legal reasoning behind that could change that result.
Then why did we increase the amount that we were giving our charter schools?
What are you talking about?
The increase in the funding to charter schools was not as a result of discretionary millage, it was as a result of capital.
Oh, yeah.
As
the
contained in
capital.
the statute.
That's right.
Right, that's separate.
Yeah.
At least from what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Jane, then Shirley.
We are one of the only counties, I think, in the state who have given both referendum dollars and capital dollars in the past to charter schools equally with our other schools. It is not in statute at this time. It could become an issue at some point in time. But also, I would like this document cleaned up and to look at it again, because I think there are a myriad of things that we've changed in here, we've talked about. I looked at it and I realize that most of this is in statute, and it's important that we make it clear to those people that are looking at this document from a standpoint of applying for a charter school as well as ourselves. So I'd really like to bring it back again.
Thank you. Shirley.
Just back to that at its discretion. I know that even the state, when they give some additional dollars, they sometimes ask to make sure that, to prove that this charter has been financially sound or some things like that. So, it could be, I think we'd be within our power to say that we would want to wait for a year or two to make sure that they're up and operating before we just, but again, that would be on that separate thing. So I like having it at its discretion, and we can have that discussion
Separately, but from the legal standpoint, it's broad enough where we don't feel, because there's nothing from a codified law, there may be a case.
There's clearly nothing illegal about saying you have discretion. It's possible that if you exercise that discretion by not sharing the revenue, somebody could sue you about it. That's what happened on the East Coast. At this point, my understanding is you have exercised your discretion to share, so it's really not an issue. From the policy writing standpoint, we just like to keep your options open as long as possible, so that you all can make that decision, from year to year.
Well, and I agree. Personally, I agree. I think I like that we have this as an extra step for multiple reasons. One, they have to come and present themselves based on just FTE funding, not that additional millage for a number of reasons. And then having a step where the board at the time can make that decision, what they feel is best if they're on their way to an approval. So I personally am okay with this language staying. Okay, from content issues, were there any additional items that wanted to be addressed?
Can I bring to your attention a couple of sections that we've added? So let's see. Under the charter contract section, and it starts on line 299. Let me see what page that is.
We have line numbers. Is it 299?
You don't have numbers on yours?
We do.
Oh, okay.
Page 11.
Okay, page 11. Right, so before, again, there was a lot of narrative there about what's in the contract, and as you know, the state requires that we use their charter template. So there's not much negotiating anymore. So we just streamlined some of this and just reduced some of the verbiage because it is in that template, and just delineated some of the big areas that are discussed in the charter. So that's something that we did. And then you may have noticed also that we added a section on accountability. Line 636. And even though some of this is in statute, again, for the public, I thought it'd be good maybe to flush some of that out. And page 22 and 23. So maybe you can take a look at that. But basically saying for a brand-new school, the application requires that they give us 5 years. But sometimes we've had issues with that. And then the actual charter contract has this language. So in the second year, you better have this. And if they choose not to use the school improvement plan, they're obligated to give us 4 years at a time, as they move through the term of their charter. So I think it's a good thing. So that's the new section. And then we also added a section on the renewals because the statute talks about the requirements of a charter school, and it talks about the board looking at their financial status and whether they're meeting their goals. But we once had a school contesting whether they need to submit an application, because we do ask our existing charters to complete a renewal packet. So I'm thinking maybe we should put it in policy that they do have an application process here in Sarasota County. So that's just...
So it's what we currently have them do right now.
Right, but 1 year we had one charter saying, well, where does it say that we have to do it? We don't want to fill out this application. Yeah. And we said, well, it's part of our process. And I realized, well, nowhere does it say that it's part of our process.
And it's not nearly as extensive.
And the statute doesn't require that they complete an application. Okay. It's a very simple one because they've been in operation, they're doing fine, but it's still, it's our opportunity or their opportunity to tell us if they're changing anything. Are they changing their program? Are they changing their grade levels? And then we capture that because that becomes part of the new charter contract. But it's something that's not required by law.
Okay. Go ahead, Shirley, and I have a couple comments on some stuff. So.
Mine is on the school improvement plans on page 23, line 660, C2. If they have a contract in excess of 5 years and choose not to develop and implement a school improvement plan, they shall submit the proposed academic achievement goals for 5 years and resubmit every 4 years. Well, is there something if they're not meeting those goals that we can come back and require that, or?
If they are a low-performing school, the Fs and the Ds, then the law does require that they submit a plan, like what happened with SSIS this year. Mm-hmm. So they were required to. So then they would go into that pathway. If we have, most of our schools are high-performing schools and are doing fine, then we are proposing that they submit goals this way. And as you know, unless it's really dreadful, they always submit some kind of plan to improve their process. And I was trying to capture some of that with this language.
Didn't we have a low C performing school that we required to come before us? I mean,
right. And there's actually what do you call it? Is it a rule? SBE rule that talks about the requirements for school improvement if a charter school is a D or an F or a D for so many years. And there's a whole nother set of rules and guidelines for that.
But when we have a school that was a low-performing C, I guess it was because they were asking for a change in their charter that we made them come before us. But if not, I mean, can't we? I mean, is there a way that we could? I mean, if they don't give an improvement plan and they just give their goals, and we're saying, wait a minute. We're looking at what you're doing and you're going down, and we want to see an improvement plan. I mean, under this, can't they just say, well, no, I don't have to. I've got a 10-year contract. And
I think that there are specific rules for D and F schools.
Yeah,
setting those aside.
But we don't want to wait until they get to be a D school.
Of course not.
I mean, is that accurate?
Right. So if the board has concerns about a particular school for a particular reason, you can certainly invite them to come in and discuss that with you.
We didn't require.
The ultimate hammer that the school board has is a termination.
Well, I can make
That's hard. Obviously, you would want to, in those contexts, give schools the ability to come in and talk with you. That's not what you want to do. You want to help it improve, obviously. I don't know that we've ever invited a school in and had them refuse to come and talk. That would seem to be somewhat self-defeating for the school. So
I suppose they would. They would want to just come in.
To have that interaction with you. If not, then we would have to look at what are our options at that point and what are the standards and how deficient is the school. But really, the ultimate thing that the school board can do is discuss terminating a charter. But I would think that the school would want to come in and have a conversation with you before it got to that level.
I mean, it'll be hard for us to keep, our A rating if we have a bunch of low-performing C schools.
True.
Well, I know that there are specified outlines for D and F schools, as we said. Whether or not we want to go to the next level and say if you're in a C, I think that's I'd have to hear more of how you would set that up and then what that would look like to try to catch it early and get them back on. But I don't know. I'm just worried that this gets to be a little bit more procedural than policy, but it's important because,
And unfortunately, when folks get bogged down with the school improvement plan, they focus so much on the template or the format and not the concept of setting goals.
I am familiar.
Right. So when the law changed and said charter schools don't have to do the SIP, and I remember debating with my colleagues in Tallahassee and saying, well, the process of doing a needs assessment and setting goals and putting in strategies and being accountable to your public is separate from the format. So unfortunately, they got fixated on that because I'm thinking if you're setting goals, remember, they're supposed to also post their goals for their parents and stakeholders. And I would think that if you're a C school or struggling, that you would also be able to report back to your stakeholders, parents, the teachers, even their governing board, what are you doing, what's in place to achieve them. It's just not very explicit in the language, but we could certainly say that it's not just your goals, but if you're struggling or going down or not meeting them, that we would like for you to show us what you're putting in place to remedy it. So I think that would be something we can put in there.
So a couple things. We are well beyond our time, which I had assumed we would be just given the depth of what's here. I think that I agree with Jane at this point. That I think there's a lot of changes so if we do another review, not necessarily as long, or may not be, but to just have another look at this to make sure, and maybe we can consider the discussion and different ways to address the C threshold. Is everyone in agreement of that? I just wanted to point out something first, Natalie, thank you very much for this. I think that it's no secret that we have a great Office of School Choice and the relationships we have, and I know you put a lot of work into that, and I appreciate that. And one thing that I want to make sure that people were aware and saw this, that it's more specified, and I'm trying to find the page because I had it highlighted, but as it relates to the dismissal of students and the procedures, well, I know that was already required by law. I know we had a circumstance in the past that was a major issue and very disappointing, and so I appreciate you outlining that. So again, from a public standpoint, if they go and look at the policy, that we do have that, and then what our expectations are for our charter schools. So go ahead.
Could I suggest that if members have some concerns or comments about the language as it is right now, that they direct them to her before the meeting, and then maybe after she talks with them, and then maybe there's some changes that she wants to make, that she notifies us of perhaps changes that may be made so that maybe we can hear about them before the meeting.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
So I can, still showing, of course, stricken language and underlined, maybe highlight in yellow those areas where we tweaked or added. Will that work?
And that would show
Eric,
just the new changes from this meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It's a joy. Thank you.
Sorry, but like I said, I didn't want to skip over it and not go through it properly. So next up is policy review. Mr. Lempe, Mr. Sprinkle, and Mr. Hareda. And probably Art is going to stay right where he's at.
That's right. Are you supposed to roll it?
He's in the middle. He's Let's hope not.
Just got it over here also.
Yikes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Superintendent. What we want to talk about, I guess, this morning is the equity policy. And I don't know that the world knows that the board has an equity coordinator, but they do. And the face to that name is sitting to my left, Mr. Al Hareda. This is really his baby, and so we're just going to let Al kick off the conversation.
All right, well, thank you, and thank you for having me here. I just want to go over what we did. What we were directed to do was to form a committee to talk about our equity procedure, and we want to. One of the things that we've gone back and forth with is the difference between the policy and the procedure. So we just are trying to be very clear that this is the procedure that we're looking at for reporting anything that violates our policy 2.72. So what our main objective was is to ensure that we had a procedure that included how all of our over 5,000 employees, as well as our 10,000 applicants and anybody else, could file a complaint and feel comfortable filing that complaint. So that's really what we looked at. So in the cover letter that I gave to you, I outlined some of the things that were major, either changes, suggestions, or anything that came from the board. So or came from the committee, from some of the suggestions that we had gotten back from you on what you wanted to look at in the new procedure. So with that being said, I'm just want to see how we want to go through it. If you want me to go bullet by bullet and explain why we made those suggested changes or additions, or do you want to open it up and you ask me any questions that you may have about the current procedure that we proposed?
I will leave that. I mean, I don't mind you highlighting some of the areas. I think that I'd rather, I'm hoping every member had the opportunity to at least briefly review what was provided, and if there were any key elements that you wanted to address right off the bat. If there is none of that, then we can move to you highlighting if that's okay.
That's fine.
So I'll open it up. Are there any direct questions, concerns, comments on any proposed changes?
No, but I have to tell you what I did. I like to see the strike-through, and there was no strike-through on this one. So I went back to the original one and read with the strike-throughs, and I found several errors. And then I went back to the new one, and those errors were gone.
Good.
So you did a good job.
No, I know you worked hard on this, so.
Thank you.
And the committee, I know there was a committee that participated in this as well, so.
And your read-ahead should have included two versions. There should have been a strike-through version and a clean version. Okay.
That's why I started with the strike-through and then went to the clean one.
Okay, so Jane
Yes.
and Eric.
When you talk about the committee, and I'm looking at page 7,
Are you on your mic?
you talk about the committee will consist of 3 individuals.
Jane, are you on your mic?
The committee will consist of 3 individuals. 1 central office administrator. Explain that, please.
Yes, what we were looking at, the reason that there's this change, if I can give a little background on the change. Our earlier procedure, if there was a complaint that was filed, that automatically went to the cost center head of whatever department or school that was from. What we found in the committee, because some of the committee members were from schools, that several of the school principals and cost center heads had difficulty keeping it separate because they knew about whatever discipline or whatever behaviors had been going on with this individual employee that may have maybe the part of what they're looking at with the feeling like they've been discriminated against. So when we removed it from the school-based or cost center head, what we decided to do was, that used to be in our step 2 procedure, in our appeals procedure, that it would be, the lead would be a administrator from the central office, and then would include a member of SDA and a member of SBA. And when I look back and I presented some numbers to the committee, it seemed like most of our complaints that we had in the past were hardly ever solved at level 1, where it was just done by the cost center head, because people felt that it wasn't objective, and that they even though they tried hard, that they felt like it wasn't objective because they knew what the situation was. Over the years that I've been doing it, about the past 4 years, almost all of ours, except for 2, were solved at level 2. So we decided to try to see if making that the first level or first step, if that would seem more equitable and that they felt like they were getting heard and not being dealt with about whatever behaviors that they had in their cost center. So we looked at just taking members of the district office to be able to assist us with that, and not just at the district office. If we were looking at it wide scale, if it wasn't in facilities, we could use a supervisor in facilities. So that's what we were looking at.
Eric? Then I'll just go around.
My first issue is the one where there's a complaint against a school board member. I think that if there's a complaint against a school board member, it should go to, there's administrative bodies to handle that. There's the Florida Ethics Commission outside the school district. There's the governor's office outside the school district. And certainly there's the sheriff's office outside the school district. I think that those are places better to be served than within the school district. I think because of political reasons, conflict reasons, that if I'll use myself to make it somebody has a complaint against Eric Robinson, you should take it to the sheriff's office. You have a complaint against Eric Robinson, or if it's ethics, you should take it to the Ethics Commission. Or if you think it's really, doesn't fall in that, you should take it to the governor's office. If somebody has a complaint against Eric Robinson, it shouldn't be handled internally. I'm an elected official, I'm a politician, and I should take my lumps, and it shouldn't be handled internally. So
I raised that. I had that highlighted too. And I've been thinking about it because, quite frankly, the authority, we have no authority to do anything. At the end of the day, you could do an investigation, and then what? So, and I also think that the whole purpose, at least for me, and I believe probably likely for everyone here, is to ensure this, whatever the process is, that it's fair and objective. And often, that in that case, I think it would have to be independent, but there are laws that dictate what that jurisdiction is. The only recommendation I would propose as a change, because I think in the event that any kind of perceived misconduct or whatnot occurred, and a member of district staff felt that way, that it highlights what that course of action is, and so therefore filing a complaint with the various options.
And so, and Art and I had a conversation yesterday about this. There is a concern, if it's quite honestly anyone but me, it is a direct report of mine, which means that the employing entity is the school district, the person filing the complaint. And we have certain responsibilities as the employer, as a school district, to follow up on the employee's complaint. Now, you're exactly right. Our ability to take action against a board member would be limited to referring it to the governor's office, but I don't believe we want to be in a position that if an employee of the district filed a complaint against a school board member, that our response would be, we're going to forward your complaint to the governor's office, the sheriff's office, the Commission of Ethics, and we're, as a district, as your employer, are going to take no action. So you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes.
Well, I think it's really ultimately, with all these policy things, a policy decision of the school board. Mr. Robinson is absolutely correct that, and as Dr. Bowden said, there's nothing that the school board could do to take action against a school board member. The school board can't remove a school board member, only the governor can do that. So it is different in the case of a school board member because there is no corrective action that can be taken. And it's also correct that there are other entities that can do that, ultimately the governor, but the Ethics Commission, if it's an ethics thing, if it's a criminal battery or something, the Sheriff's Department. The place where there's the hole in the middle, which is what the superintendent perhaps is referring to, is there still could be action against the school board, i.e. a lawsuit, if there was an allegation that could be proven that a school board member took some discriminatory action against someone. So the question would be, does the board want to have anything to do with that investigation? Now, that's getting several steps ahead if we're talking about a lawsuit. I think it is appropriate somewhere in your policy to address, and I think that's what Ms. Ziegler is talking about, what happens in the event there is such a complaint. And I'm not aware that there's ever been one, but there could be, certainly. And I think it's up to the board to decide, do you want to, recognizing you can't fire a school board member, do you want to have anything to do with that process, or are you simply telling people in your policy, if you have a complaint, here is what you do about it. You take it to the Commission on Ethics, or you take it to the Sheriff's Department, or whatever. I think it's entirely appropriate to at least have that much information. Then the decision you all need to make is, do you want to do more than that or not?
Okay. Caroline, and then Shirley.
I think it would depend upon the level of the incident. I mean, something could not be so. I mean, and then you go to the Commissioner of Ethics or you go to the governor and it really didn't happen. And I mean, I'd be really careful.
Well, I see your point, but I mean, regardless, anyone can do anything. I mean, anyone can file either way, whether we have a policy that dictates something or not. I think in the effort of transparency and direction and making sure we're putting information out to, again, build upon a culture where people feel empowered and know what path to take in the event they feel that they've been wronged. I see your point.
But no one is going to do that against a sitting school board member.
Well, I don't say that.
My suggestion, if you go the route of basically informing people, we as a board are not going to investigate an allegation against a board member, which, is a reasonable position to take. I don't suggest you say, send us the complaint. If you have a complaint, send us the complaint anyway, and we'll forward it on. I think it would be more informational, public, employee, if you have such a complaint, as opposed to filing it with the equity coordinator, as you would if it was against any employee of the district, you would say any such complaints can be filed with the Commission on Ethics, or whatever category. So, but you're right, not all complaints are founded, but one can't know that when the complaint is initially filed.
But how about if a copy at least is sent to the board chair, whoever the board chair
Hold on
at that time?
I think she had a question, and then because I think, so go ahead.
I have a concern, as, Eric said, they could be filed for political reasons and, filed before a campaign. I mean, and they could file with the Division of Ethics also. I would like to know what other districts have in their policies about a complaint against a school board member. I mean, I think that's a reasonable thing to ask for. And
I recall about, a year ago when we started this conversation, we did some due diligence on various policies out there, and I don't know that we saw many addressed any level of between superintendent and board members.
No, and that's important to remind everyone. This conversation started about a year ago, and there was a conversation, and at that time, Ms. Ziegler and I did a little looking, or at least I did a little looking, I think she did too, to see if what we could see in other policies, and I will not suggest to you that I've seen 66 other ones from all the other school districts. I have not, but I have not seen a policy, and maybe Mr. Herrera has more information in his, because he's been doing the heavy lifting in recent months, but I haven't seen a policy that addressed the issue. That doesn't mean there isn't one out there or that hasn't changed in a year, but
Two small.
Good luck.
One other small things. I really liked the way that the other policy was brought forward to us with the line numbers down on it and things like that. And I would like to see that when we're changing policies, we use a procedure like this, and rather than, red and underlined and this and that. And I really like the format that the previous presenter used with the line numbers. It was easier for us to follow when she was mentioning something. And with that in mind, there's one thing that I have another concern about, and that is the timely filing. Right now, we say 6 months from the time of the incident, and I know that in the past, there's been some hesitancy to file a complaint while somebody is still under the direction of the person they're filing against. I guess that's the whole point, though. But if that 6 months is hard and fast, or perhaps when they're no longer under that supervision, because clearly what we're seeing in the papers today, it goes well beyond 6 months.
Although, and I certainly can't address all those cases, but sometimes there are issues being discussed, but they're not legal issues. Doesn't mean they didn't happen, but they're not lawsuits or formal complaints in that sense. I will say that to file a complaint, a charge with the EEOC, is typically, the 6 months comes from that. It's 180 days. In some
Okay.
circumstances, up to 300 days. And I think the reason for that, and it's not exactly a statute of limitations, but it's akin to a statute of limitations, is that so that the complaint can be adequately
All
investigated.
right, so that goes along with the EEOC filing.
The 6
Okay.
months, yeah, this is
All right.
not out of thin
All
air.
right, thank you.
Caroline, I'm sorry, you had a,
I'm good.
okay, you're good.
What I should say is that I'm fine with this 6 months.
Okay, there was
There
a,
has to be a time limit. There really has to be a time limit. This can't be in perpetuity.
I agree, yeah, no,
Yeah.
she's good. Okay, Eric?
Before I get into my issue, I just wanted to clarify, what did we all agree on about reporting for school board members?
I don't think
I heard
we
him
did.
say something, but I didn't hear.
I don't think we did. I think that it seems that we may need to do a little bit more investigating. I want to say, though, to me, I don't think that needs to hold up this process moving forward. That's my personal opinion. Because we could certainly look and see if there are other areas, if the board wants to do that, or leave what's in. I don't think what's in there now really works because there's just no authority at the end of the day. But I recognize there's other concerns. So if there's interest in looking at what other districts do, I just don't want to see the remainder of the policy not move forward because we're looking at the board member element of it, which quite frankly, I think there's already things that address that from a legal
My issue has to do with, I'm glad you put something in there if somebody finds about a complaint orally, and then and it basically tries to memorialize it down into writing, and so it outlines how that goes. But obviously, that could happen, and the person says no. I don't mean get too far down the path, but I think that if you hear about something orally, you try to memorialize it down to writing, they don't, there should be a next step, a CYA memo. You should make sure your supervisor is aware of that. There should be some sort of documentation that occurred, that you tried to accomplish that goal. It's a noble goal, but I think that needs to, if somebody refuses to do that, then that needs to go up the chain. And I don't know what you do then, but other people need to know that you heard about something verbally.
And taking that, because I think you raise a really good point. And there's a couple things. And again, I think at the core of this, we want to make sure that there's a clear path as to where to go at all levels, but also the significance of if you say something is taken seriously, and that you want everything to, if that's shared, to be done with merit, if you will, and that it will be documented. So, and I think that from a legal perspective and a compliance standpoint, I think documenting such complaints, even verbally as well, is good for the district.
And forwarding
from a
up the chain,
process.
and forwarding that information.
Well, but right now it would be documented and provided to the equity officer, correct?
No, it doesn't say anything about that. So if somebody gives you an oral complaint, you put it for someone to sign, they refuse to sign, what happens then?
Right, and maybe we could spell that out, but the intent would be that it would come to me, and if they refuse to sign it, maybe that's what the step I hear that you're saying is missing.
That person needs to notify you, hey, I heard this.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, I need you to clarify a little bit because I'm not quite.
So somebody comes to you and says, hey, Eric, this person's doing this to me. And I say, hey, you need to fill this out. You need to sign this. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to, I'm just telling you, see what you can do, but I really don't want to memorialize it. Then it comes upon me. I need to call Al and say, hey, this person told me that they're being harassed. They don't want to file a complaint, but I want to make sure that you're aware of it.
So that direction that goes to the equity coordinator will need to go beyond that. Is there an expectation that an investigation is going to be initiated absent a complaint?
No, I think I'd use his judgment on what to do at that point.
Well, I would prefer it not be judgment. I prefer it actually be spelled out one way or the other.
Isn't that hearsay, though?
Well, I mean, this is, yes, but I think it is technically, that's interesting clarification, I think important. If it's hearsay, what does that mean? If you're hearing it by secondary parties,
No, I'm saying
that's not where we're talking. We're talking a direct statement of, I felt that I was not able, I was void of my free speech element. I'm trying to think of anything that it could be. And someone say, you should file a complaint. And I say, I don't want to do that. And then you're in a position now just like we do with students. I mean, if you think about, you see something and you have to, it's incumbent upon you now when we deal with any issues with students, that you have to report it. And that's, I would think that there would be the same element at that level. But I think it has to be direct. It can't be indirect awareness. That's dangerous in my mind. So
Well, I think that if they do not file a complaint or they make an oral one, I think it is incumbent upon the administrator to ask them to file the complaint, or maybe even help them fill it out. But if they refuse to sign it, that means that, well, they really don't want you to take any action. If they're not going to sign it, I don't think there's any action that we should take, because the employee may feel, for whatever reason, they might feel retribution, or they might feel, no, they don't want to make a public issue of this. But if the employee does not want to sign the complaint, I don't know that we then file that complaint, because if we file the complaint, then it's public, and whether they wanted to sign it or not, how do you have a complaint that's not signed?
I agree.
I don't disagree. No, I think it's a good point. I just have the concern I have, and I don't know if this is where you were going, is that, so there's two things. I think you've raised a very good point procedurally, and we have to think of all the
we have to protect the employee too. If the employee doesn't want this made public.
Mm-hmm. Make sure we understand. So it happens a second time, and they say, hey, I told Eric this guy was sexually harassing me, and he didn't do anything about it. And it happened a second time. This is what he's going to say in court. I told Eric Robinson about this. He did nothing.
No, he encouraged you to file a complaint.
Right.
And that's where the documentation part comes in play. Whether I think, in my opinion, I would say, and I'm not really sure what that next step is, and I think you raised that question, is, well, so someone comes to me, I recommend, this is our policy, here it is, this is the steps, this is what you need to take, and we've gone to great efforts to ensure that there's objectivity from the investigation and review standpoint. If you choose not to file that complaint, which I know that there's a myriad of reasons why, may or may not, but now I'm in a position where I know about something, I think there should be some format of record for that.
So might I suggest that the documentation of the conversation goes to the equity coordinator, and then the equity coordinator reaches out to the individual and confirms that they were given an opportunity to file a complaint, to get kind of outside of that chain of command, have the equity coordinator say, I understand that there's a rumor or we've heard, do you wish to file a complaint? And it gets out of the individual's chain of command, and then the equity coordinator confirms that they contacted the individual and extended an opportunity to file a complaint, and explained, we cannot act absent a complaint, but I just want to make sure that you're not wanting to file a complaint. But to leave it to judgment, I want it to be lockstep, that what is it you're asking of the equity coordinator? When do we pursue investigations and when do we not?
Well, and there could be a situation with, there are a number of issues, obviously, but an individual could say that for his or her own reasons, I don't want to pursue this at all, and the equity coordinator is told that. Let's suppose that unbeknownst to the person, the complainant, there had been two other similar complaints. And at least if you have a common repository, the equity coordinator would know that.
That's I think the goal has always been for me.
At some point, there could be a level with, well, we can't sit by when, one person can tell us they're okay with this, they're just informing it, but if there starts to be multiple,
then it's our responsibility to, but I think that channeling it to directing it to the equity officer is a great way to circumvent. But again, I think there needs to be a record of that, and then there's another opportunity, maybe in a more comfortable setting, I don't know. There's that opportunity, whether they deny or accept to move forward or not. That's to be determined, and but then from a record standpoint, we have it. I think that the more, I always say autonomous, but, like an internal affairs, no, that's not right. Something like that. That's what I always think of. But I've used that example a number of times because I think that's what often just in any environment, no matter where you are, it's what keeps people from often coming forward with anything that they're concerned about. So that to really frame it that way has been one of my focuses. Go ahead.
I think there's two issues. Having the record, you want the record, but at what point is that a public record? I mean, is it a public record just for doing it? And I would think that if that's the case, I mean, there's an employee that, let's just, say something. Well, say, there was an assistant principal and a principal, and they ended up, maybe having an affair or asking for something, and then she wants and then they file the complaint, but she doesn't want to make it public because she doesn't want to jeopardize, or he doesn't want to jeopardize his marriage. And then all of a sudden, you've got this thing out there, and it becomes a public record. I just have a concern about at what point does it become a public record?
It would be public right away, my understanding.
Well,
no?
Typically, complaints are not public until the investigation ceases to be active. If there is no investigation in the first place, I, off the top of my head, am not aware of an exemption for such a document. So that's a legitimate concern. I'm not sure, just sitting here, what the best way is to address that concern. I think that.
I mean, I have a concern because the complainant may not want this to be public knowledge. And I know it's a sticky situation, but it is a sticky situation when something like that happens.
Well, the point, but this is,
and do you want to stop the behavior with the employee, but employer or the supervisor? But what if the employee wants to stay anonymous in this, or not be a part of it?
I think you're raising good issues, and they're important issues. They are not issues that are unique to us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when we look, like when we started looking at this issue, we found that it really hadn't been addressed a whole lot of places, at least where we looked. I would suggest that you've given us a number of issues to look at, which, at least that last one, is unique to public entities. If it was, IBM or Microsoft or whatever, they wouldn't have a concern about the public record issue, but we have to have that concern. So I'm certainly not trying to put this off for another long period of time, but I think we can at least look to see if we can learn from others' experiences and get some of those policies and see how this has been addressed, if at all.
Okay, Eric.
And Shirley Brown is totally right. She loves it when I say this. But, so I'm going to say, but you have to balance the rights of the individual versus the rights of the group and the organization. And so Shirley's 100% right when she talks about we need to be concerned about the rights of the individual. But if somebody's sexually harassing 10 people and none of those 10 people want to do a complaint, we have responsibility to number 11, number 12, and so on as the governing body of the organization. So I just, you get this way, you get paid the big bucks, Al. I hope you're able to balance those two concerns, the rights of the individuals and the responsibility that we as a governing body has to the organization. And I know Al can do that.
I don't disagree, but actually I agree, and then I don't agree on the last part. I think that we can't have it ambiguous. It has to be clearly, so my personal thought, Shirley, I think you raise a very valid point, but I think that in the big scheme, in the big picture, and this is why I think this is long overdue, just to really, especially, I mean, this needs to be discussed and for a number of reasons, but to really make sure the members of staff understand the core of why we're doing this. And so I recognize that there can be sticky situations, but it can have massive implications for the district, and we're dealing with students. I mean, there's just, it's too risky. I recognize that the public component of it it's an unfortunate circumstance that we had to deal with, and there's nothing in that makes it exempt right now from sunshine. But I don't like the idea of. I think that it's necessary to have some level of record for a number of reasons. And I liked the path that you recommended, that the documentation go, to you, and it's not, and then there's the opportunity to file a formal complaint. And yes, I mean, if somebody were to be tipped off about it, and then they could do a public records request, sure. I think those are a lot of steps would happen, but I would rather see the latter than avoid it all at all. So I just think that I think it's the better route to go.
Well, the file is exempt from public record while the investigation is going on. And if there's never an investigation, at what point does it become a public
It
record?
would always be a public record, is my understanding. There's no exemption to it.
I mean, you start with the basis that everything's a public record and then look for an exemption. There's
Okay.
an exemption for investigations. There's an exemption for complaints to some point. And I want to look. I'm not trying to give you a definitive answer at this point, because this is obviously a place where privacy and public records intersect. And so let me see what I can find in this scenario. But in a typical, you file a complaint, there's an investigation, there's a statute right on that, and it tells us that eventually these things become public records. So I would not expect that in the scenario we're talking about, that things would not also become, at some point, a public record, perhaps immediately.
Okay. So I think where do we go from here? I know you were taking a lot of notes, Scott. I think this is the quietest I've ever heard you. That doesn't make sense, does it? So I think there are a couple elements that wanted to be tweaked, or to follow up on. And then from a timeline standpoint, I think that it's just for clarification, we have addressing the language around a school board member and the procedures there, and then verbal complaints. Was there anything else that anyone else wanted to raise?
My only concern is I'd like to get a timeline, a date when you're going to come back with whatever input you
Next
got.
workshop.
No.
Not a year.
I think that, I don't know how long it will take. I think it's going to be hard to find the school board component. I just don't know that there's anything in there. I am not opposed to seeing some drafts, and we can, based on the comments that were taken today, and bringing it before us. If we wait for a workshop, I'm not crazy about that. I honestly have no issue with bringing it forward, because we have to advertise it, and there's a whole process around that. So, I'd like it as early as the February 6th meeting to even. Well, I guess we can't do that. Well, we might, because we have the next discussion is about our policy review and schedule. So maybe that will lend itself an opportunity quicker than, depending on what the board wants to do, so that we could bring it back earlier than that. So, but no later than February 20th meeting?
Well, do you
workshop?
want another conversation about it? Because I don't know that this is not just kind of cleaning up some language. This is bringing in important concepts that the board may or may not agree on. I don't know. So I would think you would want another conversation about it when we come back and report to you.
I don't think you have a product that's ready for.
That's ready
No,
to
that's
be
right.
put on.
So February 20th meeting would be the next workshop. Okay.
And we certainly can do the investigation we need to do to get back to you to report back, and then.
That would be exempt from public record, so yeah.
No, it wouldn't. Not that investigation.
So, and then similar to what Shirley said earlier on the charter school component, as we've reflected, if there's any additional items to make us more efficient and get a final product sooner, that be raised and discussed with said parties. February 20th, but also as drafting comes forward. So February 20th is the next draft. Yes?
Yes.
Any other items on this? No, he's not. Well, and we are very behind, but I'm hoping that the next item can catch us up. I think it would catch us up. So, no, we'd still be 30 minutes behind, but necessary discussion. So, moving on to policy review, process, and schedule.
So as this morning has clearly illustrated, there's some great conversation going on around the policies of the district. Some of those conversations take some time. We have committed ourselves to literally reviewing every policy of the district, to go through the policy manual from front to back. You can see what a time-consuming exercise that is going to be. In a conversation just about schedule is, if we allow